The views expressed by the speakers of CamaPlan podcasts are those of the speakers only and may not reflect those of Cama, its members, or employees. Cama does not guarantee the accuracy of information provided by these speakers. Professional advisors should be consulted before implementing any options presented. Cama absolutely does not endorse or recommend any individual or organization, including the speakers. Cama, its members, and employees do not accept liability for losses and/or damages arising from errors or omissions within, reliance upon, or any use of the information provided by the speakers. Individuals are strongly encouraged by Cama to conduct their own due diligence before making any investment choices. Cama does not act as, nor offer the services of, an investment advisor, CPA, realtor, or attorney. If tax, legal, accounting, investment, or other similar expert assistance is required, the services of a competent professional should be sought. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to The Road to Financial Freedom, a podcast that allows experts to share their stories and secrets to unlocking their financial independence. This podcast is brought to you by CamaPlan, a self-directed IRA administrator in Ambler, Pennsylvania that is focused on educating investors with different ways to grow their retirement savings faster through alternative investments. And of course, we continue to record our podcast remotely. I'm Jess Jones. I'm a CamaPlan team member and podcast host. This week's guest is Chief Investment Officer for Upside Avenue, which is an award-winning, non-traded multifamily REIT. He is responsible for executing the company's growth strategy, identifying and acquiring multifamily investments throughout the U.S. Sunbelt region, and is a leading institutional equity and debt capital raising activities while providing strategic oversight of the company's overall portfolio. With over 13 years of commercial transaction experience, he specializes in bringing deep knowledge and understanding to the acquisition and asset management of multiple asset types, including multifamily, student housing, office, and retail. His value and expertise play crucial roles in providing both his team and his high net worth clients as he develops the firm's market presence, profitable opportunities, and leading acquisitions. So please welcome Chirag Hathiramani to our podcast. Hi, Chi. Thank you so much for joining us today. I am good. I'm good. Thanks so much for being here. I'm so excited to learn more about what you do, your background before you got to this point. So let's dive right in. Start, from the beginning. Where were you born? Where did you grow up? Where did you go to school? What did you study? All that. I find that this answer is very interesting across the board because it sometimes leads people down very interesting avenues, which no pun intended for Upside Avenue, but.
Great. Yeah, sure. So I was born in the Philippines, Manila, Philippines, the capital over there. I actually grew up in the Philippines until about high school, where I went to study in India for a few years at an international school. So I finished up at my 12th grade in India and then finished up 10th grade in India, went back to the Philippines, studied for a few more years, finished up to 12th grade, and then came to the U.S. for college.
Interesting. When you studied, what was this an independent thing, or was that something that you did on your own, or did you travel with family? Did you have family anywhere else throughout or was this all just like because you were being driven by studies at such a young age?
So interestingly enough, we're an Indian family in the Philippines. So in India, actually, we did have family too. But the decision to go study in India for a few years, 3 years it was really just out of an interest in going to this international school.
That is really cool.
Yeah, and came back and yeah.
Yeah. Very, very cool. So I cut you off because I was just so interested in, what drives someone before 10th grade to do a big move like that. So I think that's really interesting. Sorry, continue.
Yes, I came back to the Philippines and, I was always interested in computers growing up. And I thought, one day I was going to, go work in the computer industry and go start a computer, basically a computer business and go do that. But in my 11th grade, in between 11th and 12th grade, I actually picked up a book on real estate by a guy named Robert Kiyosaki. A lot of people know it. Rich Dad, Poor Dad. It's one of the entryways into real estate investing for a lot of people. In my high school years, I went ahead and picked up that book, fell in love with real estate and this whole notion of investing and cash flow and building your assets in real estate, and that really kind of spurred the rest of everything from there. So I went to Virginia Tech, that was still a legacy sort of idea because Virginia Tech has a great computer science program. So I went to Virginia Tech to go into computer science. But by the time I'd really entered the university, I was actually walking through the bookstore one day and I found a real estate book. And so I immediately signed up for the real estate class, met the professor, and he's like, gee, there's a real estate program. And about, I think it was like 3 weeks, and I called my dad. I'm like, Pop, switching to real estate. He's like, okay, go do what you do,
That's awesome.
That was it. So I went and got a degree from Virginia Tech in real estate, and then went to, from there on, just kind of moved on and went to go work for a REIT, actually, based out of New York, but had a major operation in DC. It was called Vornado Charles E. Smith. So they had about a $5 billion portfolio in DC at the time. And so I went to go work in their acquisitions group, basically. There was a short stint in property management, but then jumped into their acquisitions group.
That's really interesting. Is there anything, I have a couple of questions from that. Thank you for sharing all of it. Is there anything that sticks out to you in terms of all of the different, you said you were a property manager for a brief stint, you worked for a REIT, and then obviously, you've worked and created your own and become a leading manager in one of your own. So what are some of the things that have kind of surprised you as they've popped up again, even if it's like a computer science thing? What's something that's popped up again later in your life? Because I'm always interested about that stuff. I have a theater background, and you don't think finance and theater go hand in hand, but then like I look at what I do here when I interview people like you, and I'm like, okay, well, this is my degree at play right now. This is something that interested me however many years ago when I was in the 10th grade, and now I'm doing it in a completely different setting. So is there anything like that came up for you?
Absolutely. So actually, the computer science side of it was always computer related and technology related. That interest never went away. So today, what we're looking at is, we use technology heavily for our real estate, activities. We use all sorts of data analytics tools, gathering tools, resource. Prop tech is such a big aspect of sort of the real estate industry today, and that's something we're actively trying to engage in as a company. And so that natural fit with, it's an inclination of mine personally. It draws me to those sides of, I'm naturally jump right into technology, so that's it. Yeah, it's never left. That's a
good way of saying it. It's never left. You can take the guy out of IT, but you can't take the IT out of the guy. So great. You mentioned like how you got interested at first in real estate. So how did you then get involved in multifamily investing and multifamily REITs? And could you also explain, because I know people like myself, I had to do some research on REITs just to have this conversation. Could you kind of briefly explain what exactly that is, how they work, and how that functions within the real estate investment world?
Yeah, so maybe I'll start with that. In a broad asset class, people can invest in real estate in multiple different ways. You can invest in what we call public real estate, which is the companies you see on the stock market. You can invest privately, which is to either buy your own, real estate on your own, or partner up with companies that do it professionally on that side. There's other ways of sort of even cutting that investment. Some people invest in what we call equity, which is like buying shares in a company or buying, putting out your own cash to buy a real estate deal. Most people think of that as equity. And then there's also the debt side, where some people sometimes make private loans to people. So like if a house flipper comes to you and says, "Hey, I want to flip this house, but I need some cash," you might structure it as debt, where you say, "Okay, well, I'll give you $100,000, couple $100,000. You owe me a fixed 10% rate of return." So you can invest as equity, where you get some of the upside. You can invest as debt. You can invest privately, publicly. These are all sort of, if you drew a matrix in your mind, left to right, bottom to top, there's all these different pockets that you can invest in. REITs are one specific area of that pocket. What they do is they allow investors to tap sort of larger, more institutional real estate, generally speaking, through this vehicle. Because what it does is it like a fund, it pools money and then goes and invests it in real estate. Now, when you're pooling a lot of money, you can invest in much better real estate in the best locations in cities and things of that nature. So that's exactly it. A REIT is really a real estate investment trust, which is basically just it's really a fund in and of itself to invest in real estate.
Awesome, great. So then the second part of that question, I guess, would be then how did you get led from your interest in real estate and the whole matrix to just finding that pocket itself?
Oh gosh. So going back to where I started, right? I mentioned property management. So actually starting in property management, that's a very down to the ground, sort of boots on the ground operational level, type function. And then there's another layer above that, or behind that, let's call it. I wouldn't want to say above or, but behind it, asset management, which is basically the people that work with them, but are more focused on the overall value creation of the property. It's about maximizing cash flow, increasing the value of the property, following the business plan, hitting the target, the expected returns. That's an asset manager function. And then you go one step behind that, it's the acquisitions function. These are the people who are looking for the deals, putting the deals together, and drafting the business plan per se, and saying, guys, this is what we want to accomplish, and that's handed off to the asset management, which then works with property management. So I basically jumped from property management straight to acquisitions because I had an interest in investing, and that's people who like property management tend to be very very hands-on and like touching the asset. Mm-hmm. People who tend to work in acquisitions tend to like the cash flow and the money side and structuring the deal and the equity and all of that. So that was my interest. And so that's how I sort of landed up on that side.
Yeah, it's really interesting how you've kind of let interest really lead the way, and especially in the start of your journey. Is there anything else? I know you mentioned Rich Dad, Poor Dad, and you mentioned your own father, who I think it's incredible whenever parents can support their kids' passion, their want to change their major up at some point. Was there anything else or any other person who kind of inspired you to become an entrepreneur? Was there anybody during your property management time or an acquisitions person that you saw and you were like, I want to do that? Anything like that came up for you?
So, actually there's a few people along the way, and there's many great people actually. One of them was a guy named Ernie Whittick, who was my boss for 10 years at Vornado. Just the greatest guy you'll ever meet, character par none, and a work ethic like no other. He was a senior vice president over there. And I actually, how I moved from property management to acquisitions, obviously always, grace of the above, we'll always give that first. But it was happenstance that we met on site. At the property I was working, and he just happened to be there, and my property manager was busy, and so she's like, hey, Chi, would you mind touring, this SVP of acquisitions? And I toured with him, and basically everything went well, and then 2 days later, I think HR called and said, yeah, he'd like you to go work for him. So, that was kind of the, so you just never know, right?
Right, yeah.
So he taught me well. He's a very disciplined person. It was grueling, quite grueling, but at the end of the day, I respect him to no degree. There's just I thank him for everything I learned, really, up to very far in my career. Next one is actually our current CEO and founders. They're fantastic people. Our CEO is Yan Young, and our founder, Monty Lee Wen, and his wife, actually, Nellie Lee Wen. All really strong folks, just amazing, the bold thinkers, and really great people to work with culturally. So those are some of the direct people I've had a chance to work with. One of the luminaries is Warren Buffett. Just the core value, investing philosophy. You just back to fundamentals. Does it make take away all the spreadsheets? Just look at the deal. Does it make sense?
Right.
When you look at it from a bare bones perspective, that philosophy and being independent, right? Treating the market as call it Mr. Market, right? That the market is sort of it's a billboard of what things are priced at, but it's up to us to determine what value is. So we always have to make independent decisions. So those are some of the lessons from him. So yeah, those are the luminaries.
Thank you. That's probably one of my favorite answers I think I've ever gotten on that question, just because you really hit a ton of different things. But I'm always interested when people bring up Warren Buffett too, because they always have something different to take from him, and that's really what makes him just so influential and so inspiring, I think, too, just hearing from our guests all the different things that they're able to kind of pick up from his quotes and how they've used that in their strategies is always fascinating to me. So I think that's great that that's what you're able to kind of glean from him. So let's talk about Upside Avenue. What does Upside Avenue do? Who is a typical client of you guys? How do they benefit from non-traded multifamily investments and these REITs? And what's a typical client able to expect from working with Upside?
Yeah, sure. So I think as we briefly went over, Upside Avenue is a REIT, right? So it's an organized, it's a vehicle, really, an organized fund to go invest in real estate. Now, what Upside Avenue, the benefit that Upside Avenue has primarily is that it gives access to folks that generally are not accredited investors, and accreditation requirements are per the SEC a certain level of income, a certain level of assets, that kind of thing. Not everybody. In fact, there's only, I think, 4 or 5% of the United States population that actually fits into an accredited bucket.
Right.
So then what happens to everybody else, right? So this is really, these vehicles were created or promulgated to allow investors like you and me access to sort of these, to institutional level investing per se through these funds with sophisticated management teams behind them. Right. Otherwise, we would just sort of be DIYing it, trying to buy a house next door. Instead, no, let's go find a $50 million property and put professional management in there and go drive value that way. Right. So these vehicles help us do that. And specifically a REIT like this, and it's a crowdfunded REIT under what we call Regulation A, which allows somebody with, in the case of our REIT, somebody with as little as $2,000 to come in and start participating in institutional real estate. So it's really that access for all. Now, in reality, what we're finding is a lot of folks well above those limits are actually coming in and participating in the REIT. We've got folks putting in their, IRAs, their, SDI through SDIRAs, and all sorts of other vehicles as well. In addition to just, kind of investing their cash directly. So we've got people cutting checks 50, 100, 150. I think we have one with 600. It's quite a vehicle. The REIT itself invests in multifamily right now all across Texas. It's invested in over a dozen assets and continues to grow those holdings. But really, over time, as the REIT matures over the coming years, will be invested across the Sun Belt in not only multifamily but also senior housing and student housing. So basically, anything residential will sort of start to be encompassed by the REIT over its journey.
That is incredible. I think that the fact that you have such a wide-ranging audience and a wide-ranging client base too. How do you, I'm going to jump ahead to one of the other questions that comes to mind is, how do you then structure as managers or as the chief investment officer? Like, how do you structure or present deals or things like that to these clients in ways that it's able to be appealing to someone on one end of the spectrum versus the other end of the spectrum? And then the other question I have, which I'll try to remember it when it comes back around, is, you've seen a lot of different people. You deal with a ton of different people from different walks of life and different levels of income. What are some of the common characteristics that you've seen that you think makes someone investing in alternative assets or investing in these REITs a successful person? If there are any common characteristics you see in the accredited investors and or the more established investors and the new people who are investing that $50. So we'll start with the how do you structure your deals? How do you develop those strategies and how do you present them?
Yeah, definitely. So, in addition to, I'll go a little bit broader first. So Upside Avenue's parent company is called Casora Group. And that, as Casora Group, I'm also the CIO of Casora Group. What we do at Casora Group is basically build all these investments for multiple different investor types. So we've got institutional investors like, private equity funds, tens of billions of dollar type private equity funds. We've got those. We've got family offices. We've got the accredited investors, the high net worth and ultra high net worth investors. And then we've got our Upside Avenue investors who we're basically bringing in also as when Upside Avenue invests, it invests into these same deals with all of these other people as an sort of equal partner, or sometimes even higher up than them. So we structure all of the deals to meet all of these different folks. Everybody's got a different set of parameters. Institutions want to see things a certain way, family office a certain way, accredited investors a certain way, even an Upside Avenue as a REIT wants to see things a certain way. So we structure the deals accordingly, whether it's the you could say it from the leverage that you use in a deal to what kind of equity you bring in the deal, whether it's common equity or preferred equity. These are all just different ways of slicing how the money is put into a deal, right? And who gets what in terms of returns. So we generally design the deals to be, depending on the type of investor that wants these types of deals, we generally cater to that investor or one or more investor types. If that
that definitely answers the question. I think because especially the old adage, everybody's different. So, you got someone who comes in like me, I am in my 20s. I don't have a thing invested in anything except my 401k, which I don't touch. I don't think about, I know I need better ways of passive income. But how do I get that? And so that's great. Like I can go on and see from Upside Avenue, I have this option available to me and this appeals to me. Whereas someone like Warren Buffett is not going to come in and have the same outlook that I do if they're logging onto your website and that sort of thing. So I think that that's really interesting, and that you're able to kind of appeal to the masses in that way. That's really awesome.
And everybody, like you said, right? Everybody's got a different interest. So people that are most interested in Upside Avenue tend to be looking for some level of income, a little bit, but they want more growth over time. That's why Upside Avenue is designed as a long-term, I call it vehicle, for growth, really. Right. So if you're coming into Upside Avenue, generally you don't want to invest for less than 3 years, but generally your horizon should be, this is a long-term thing. This is 10 years. I want to see the appreciation over time. I want to reinvest my dividends, which we call the dividend reinvestment program, which then starts to compound your returns over time. And again, another concept of Warren Buffett, right? Compounded returns are what make the world go round. So that way there's that. And then there's other investors that, maybe they're past sort of the phase of growth and they're just more focused on income. It could be a very high net worth investor that says, this is really my family income from here on out. So I want to invest $500,000, $1 million, $2 million, into a direct deal with you and, clip what we call maybe an 8% average rate of return. And they're happy with that, or a 10% rate of return, and they would come in as a preferred equity investment, or they might want to participate as well. So it's just all over. Yeah,
seriously, it runs the gamut, and I think that that's extremely interesting. And you mentioned that you're starting to bring in. I didn't forget my other question. I'll ask it again. But you mentioned that you wanted to you're bringing in senior housing and student housing too. So. Really that pool is going to keep growing, and I want to talk some more about that in just a moment. But what have you found then, Chi, are some of those common characteristics among these people, or what celebrated unique differences do you find as well that makes your job exciting? But I'm curious too, since you deal with such a large varying group of people, where are the similarities? Where are the commonalities?
Yeah. The successful investors that I've found, the folks that are, on their way to financial freedom, tend to have a few key characteristics. One, they have really well-defined goals. They know what they're looking for, right? And they know when they get there, right? Another one is that persistence, that proactivity to keep going, that grit. That's really another really just. I can't stress how important that is, because things don't always go right. Right. So having that rebound. I've also noticed they tend to be a little bit more broad thinking than just themselves. They tend to think of others too. It's a bigger picture that they have in mind, and so then they're able to bring in other people to work with them, teams, and inspire other people to be part of what it is they're trying to accomplish. I've also noticed that these people tend to enjoy the moment. They tend to live in the journey itself. It's not always about, hey, I want a $5 million balance sheet out in the future. It's along the way. How do I get there? And am I enjoying every step of the way?
I love that.
Just a few things that noticed along the way.
Yeah, I know. I really love that, because I think that is something that I'm sure a lot of people, if you're just starting, getting bogged down by how do I get started? How do I get from point A to point Z? It's like, you got to just stop and enjoy it. You have to understand that sometimes, ass happens. And it's definitely, have clear goals, but don't let that stop you from being able to look back and say, wow, I was able to accomplish XYZ in the past year, and that's really great. And I was able to accomplish it for others. I love the way that you said that, these people are thinking of other people. It goes beyond just the self, and it really reaches outward. And I think that that's incredible.
Yeah. So actually our CEO wakes up every morning. I don't know if it's every morning, but a lot of mornings, basically wakes up and asks himself, why am I here? Mm-hmm. Right. And not as the CEO of the company, but as a human being. Why am I here?
Yeah.
Right? And start with that.
Yeah. And I think that coming from the top down makes it, that message is so clear in just the way you explain what Upside is able to do and who you've been able to reach. So I think that that's incredible. It's a good question people should start asking themselves, especially when it comes to just like thinking broadly and then focusing on, okay, well, why am I here about to invest this amount of money in this thing? So mentioning, I mentioned this earlier, you've expanded the different types of acquisitions and asset management that you deal with in multiple asset types. So the student housing, the senior housing, retail, you said, or I think was in your bio as well, and office spaces and all of those things. So how do you, what are these processes like? How do you decide to diversify within the REIT? And then how do you execute the due diligence on these things and figure out, okay, well, I'm going to vet this investment for my clients. How does that happen?
Yeah, generally. So the REIT is actually more focused primarily on conventional multifamily today, right? So with its current, call it 12 assets or so in the portfolio, we'll be expanding into senior housing, student housing as opportunities present themselves. Actually, post-COVID, there's been a lot of structural change in both those segments. So we're actively watching the segments and we'll jump in at the right time. But historically, I've been part of office, retail, and also multifamily in previous generations in student housing. I think the diligence approach is consistent in some ways and very specialized in other ways. For example, from a consistency standpoint, it's always about the fundamentals. Are you purchasing at the right basis is what we call it, but at the right price relative to market, right? Are you purchasing at the right cap rate? Which cap rate is just it's an indication of the return you get for the dollars you spend. So if you're spending $100 to acquire a piece of real estate and it's giving you $5 a year of net profit from operations, that's called a 5% rate of return. We just use the word cap rate, right? There's that. There's also, as we're in the business of adding value to the real estate. We don't just buy real estate and hold it as our company, right? We're a vertically integrated company. We have everything: property management, asset management, construction management, utility billing, green improvements, you name it, 9 yards, right? Right. So there's a measure of value created that's important, and we call that yield on cost or return on cost, which means if I bought something for $100 and I put in another $10, how much have I increased the yield? Did I increase it from $5? Remember that $5 return per year. Did I take it to 10? So if I took it to 10 and I've got a little over $100 in it, $110 in it, I think it's up to a 9% return on cost or yield on cost. So those metrics matter from that perspective. Then you hear of the traditional measures that investors look at, which is the levered IRR, or in some cases, some other investors know of the annual rate of return, right? The compounded annual rate of return, or the average annual rate of return. We also look at a diaspora of other measures. What are you selling at? Those kinds of things. So those things comprise the fundamental measures of an asset, or of the quality of the investment opportunity. Then you go into the really specific things. Like, so for an office or retail deal, you generally get an empty space and you have to pay the tenant to build out their space. If it's a coffee shop, you're helping them buy the tables, the chairs, the whatnots, giving them some money to build out their, the bar and all of that kind of fun stuff, right? Right. And their pastry, thing. If it's an office space, it's all of the cubicles, the chairs, even sometimes the computers, all those kinds of things are included. So those are different considerations. Then you're looking at the quality of the tenant, right? What's the quality of the person going into that space? So considerations like that. With multifamily, you're looking at average household incomes in the area, the poverty rate in the area, household values in the area. So those diligence metrics are a little different than what you would look at for office. That's where the specialty type comes in, right? Got it. Yeah, so there's some basics to it, and then there's a lot of nuances to that.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate the fact that you're diving in and taking the work to do the nitty gritty here on this interview too, because I feel like I'm learning a ton about how these things work, and this isn't necessarily my forte, so it's a great explanation. I think a lot of our listeners will probably be able to take away from this and be like, oh yeah, I get it now. So thank you, Chi. I appreciate you being able to share that stuff with us. So, you mentioned the quality of tenant, which I thought was interesting because it leads me to another question too. Similarly to what common characteristics have you seen in successful investors? What are some of the things you look for in terms of partnering, working with tenants, working with employees, are there certain qualities that you look for? Are they similar to the investor qualities, or are they different in terms of who you choose to work with?
Definitely. There's a couple key things. Number one, when you're working with anybody, it's integrity, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Completely.
Do they have a long-term mindset? Right, a long-term approach, because if they do, that's wonderful. You can build great things together over time. If they don't, then any shift, any volatility will tend to, crack that relationship or move things in a different way. Sharp skills are generally, at this level of the game when you're playing with $50-100 million assets. The skills are there, definitely needed, and a willingness to be proactive. And proactively resolve issues, keep moving. That grit to keep moving forward is very, very important. Specifically to our company, we have certain things that we look for people that work with us, for a resident. Well, with residency, they're really more of a customer. But when you take one step back, when you're looking at the people on your team, then we have certain other requirements. Like as a company, we're mission driven to create what we call better homes for better lives.
Yes,
So the idea there is that we have the power to shape real estate and change the environment for our audience, right? Which is residents, and in the future will be tenants as well for the commercial real estate side. So in shaping that environment, the goal is to create a better life. Now we ask ourselves, what is a better life? Is it granite countertops and stainless steel appliances and chrome fixtures? Or is it when they come home, they feel safe, happy, and can spend time with their family, their kids, in a place where they're really happy to be, So looking at that, the focus is really more on them, on their life. When they're at work and they're ready to go home, what's the feeling that they get about going home?
Yes. Yeah.
Right? That's what we're focused on, right? So that's that better homes for better lives philosophy that we have. Other things is like a reflection of our core values. So we have 5 core values at our company. Being bold. So going out there, getting it, right? Chasing the dream, we call it, caring, demonstrating love and care for everybody in your, that you work with, be it employees, owners, investment partners, whatever it is, that care. Being teachable. So always being growth oriented, growth minded, right? Being inspiring. So it's our responsibility to wake people up, right? And kindle that spirit in everybody. So being inspiring, and then being exceptional. Right, which sort of goes back to that skill, right? Know your stuff, be real good at what you do, right?
Yeah.
So those are specifically for our company. Those are some of the key traits that we're looking for, both from a culture and from a value standpoint.
Wow, what an incredible mission to drive that question of waking up every day. Why am I here? I think that's really, really, really special, and it's. I love the idea of core values in business is something that's pretty recently been introduced to me. And it's not something I always think about, but it really makes such a big difference. I think if your team can be on the same page and everybody has this agreement of these core tenets that they choose to do business by, what a powerful thing it can be and the impact it makes for others. So I'm curious, have you seen that pay off on your own individual core values? Is that how you have found yourself leading and acquiring these assets and working in asset management? Has that informed your own personal core tenets? Have they core values differed in any way? Or how did you build your own based off of that, or did you have that going into?
Yeah, definitely. So there's actually there's a resonance of core values. Whenever you join a company, you're actually joining a core set of values. You may not know it. Right. Nobody. People might be unconscious to the core values of the company, but you definitely are joining it for sure. So in our company, we choose to make it explicit, and in the hiring process, we actually, once you're done with all of the interviewing process, the last interview is where you will meet people you do not know in the company, and we will have a values interview, and that's basically where we will ask about your values and then how you live, and what's important to you, and it's key to determining that resonance, because we've had people leave the company, or we've even had to, in some cases, open the door and let them out, letting them know that it's not a value fit. And then you've also seen people in the company whose values align, and they do so well, and they succeed, and they start rising to the top so quickly. Right. So it's beautiful to see that. Yeah, it's working. It's working, right? Yeah.
That's an incredible part of the interview process, I think. I'm sorry, yeah, you go ahead, but I just think that that's a really, I'm hearing more about that lately. And I think that that's really valuable in terms of, if I was someone coming into a organization, I would love to have an interview like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I think it's very welcomed. And we're blessed to have, that kind of culture, obviously led from the top, from our leadership. Yeah.
Yeah, that's incredible. For you, Chi, looking back on anything that you've experienced, even before joining Upside, looking back from where you are now to where you started, are there any, we love to kind of dig deep and focus on the stories that are not always so successful. And what were you able to take away from it? What were the lessons, any big mistakes or any big life lessons that you had to learn early on? And how do you get through that? I think it's always really important to okay, yes, this was my mistake, but this is how I reoriented my mindset so that I didn't let it get me down and I pushed forward and persevered, because those are obviously core values that you have. So how did you develop those? What did you have to learn maybe the hard way to do that?
So, and this is a credit to my parents. They did the very best to raise me right. Mm-hmm. Now, obviously, all the shortcomings are mine. And one of the shortcomings was a total lack of discipline and always taking the easy way. So when I was going back to grade school. When I was in grade school, I failed math for grade 1, grade 2, grade 3, 3 years in a row, and got kicked out of basically, elementary school, and had to go to a different set of schools.
Oh my gosh!
Montessori school, and they're like, "You're too dumb." I don't know how they called it in the nicest way possible. They basically told my mom, "He can't. I'm sorry. He can't be part of this." So I went through that, so I had to, and then it was easy. I was in Philippine public school, which is not actually the standards are not very, very rigorous over there, unfortunately, but that's the way it is. But then by the time that was actually one of the key decisions why I went to go study in India at that international school. It was a choice. And it was one of the most difficult experiences personally, because that is where I had to learn discipline, just basic discipline. To study, to do what needs to be done, to push hard, right? Mm-hmm. To learn and go beyond my own comfort zone, right? So that was definitely a very interesting experience, and you have to cooperate with it, right? It's because otherwise then they'll just say, hey, please don't, you don't fit here either. So that inner acceptance and learning how to be disciplined and move forward and be proactive, I'd say goes back to some of that time, and that's a very formative part of my life, those few years back then. Because after that, the pivot was completely different. But it took me through that gauntlet, for those 3 years in India, which was, so that was one of the lessons. From an investing perspective, there's no, I've made so many mistakes, I don't know where to start. But one really interesting one is, we were investing, this is just on the personal side, we were buying up investment homes in Austin, on the east side of Austin, which everybody knows today Austin's super hot, values are skyrocketing. But when we bought it 4 years ago, it was still, just fairly decent. Right. And I got one of these homes at a wonderful discount, and I was very excited about it. And we even negotiated with the seller to give us credits for some repairs that needed to be done. And then, there was a tenant in place paying great cash flow. There was great cash flow from the investment. And it was a tenant that actually had, she was on Section 8, so the government was paying for her rent. And so she was happy. I was happy with the cash flow. Everybody was happy. Lo and behold, 4 years later, we just sold a house this year. I totally forgot that when we closed on the house, there was a roof repair that was required, and I got a credit for it. And so basically for 3 years, this roof had been getting worse. And I eventually had to cut the buyer of the property, something like a $10,000, adjustment for that item. So, mistakes like that, I could have fixed it. I didn't, I forgot about it. And so, it always reminds me to be as diligent as you can be, to not forget and, keep everything tight.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing both of those, especially one, I think as major informative as the one in the in the very beginning stages of your life, which I also was terrible at math. I didn't, so you're not alone.
Yes,
it was just like,
I
and I used to like try so hard to at it, and I just like it. And I used to get, on the flip side, I used to give myself almost like ulcers in 8th grade, just like trying to do math. But yeah, math will really mess you up as a kid if you let it. But I'm glad that we've both been able to get through it. And I'm really glad that you were able to share a fairly recent example too. Just the idea of sometimes things happen, and sometimes you can't always be expected to let your brain be 8 places at once, but you were able to learn another lesson in diligence from that. And I think that that's really incredible. So thank you for sharing.
Oh, thank you. Yeah.
Thanks. So for you now, how do you, and I think you've touched on this in some of your previous responses, but what is something that you're using now, any tools, resources, anything like that you use to keep up with your knowledge of investing and to do the research and uncover the new profitable opportunities that come to your firm?
Yeah, so there's a couple things. There's the baseline of knowledge, just that the library of knowledge, I'll call it, right? And that's reading just, there's so many great books that come out every year on business and investing and real estate and all that kind of stuff. And I'm loving this whole train of, all of these folks that are coming into the industry new and afresh and trying new techniques and all of that to invest in real estate, just over the last 10 years. It's been really exciting. So there's all these books, like, if you look at like Bigger Pockets and those types of things, there's all sorts of new books coming out. And you might wonder, like, hey, why? You've already been in the industry for, it's like really about 15 years now. But what you see is like a fresh perspective every single time. There's somebody who's trying like social media as their primary tool for capital raising or primary tool for finding, distressed off-market opportunities, things like that. And you're like, wow, never really thought of it that way. And what happens when you magnify that and apply that at scale in our business? What can that do? That could create the next $100 million profit, So there's all of those types of wonderful things. And then just professionally, you got to keep up with, the market reports, the insights that are coming, the Bloombergs, the articles, the Forbeses, and, all of those types of things, local news, all of that. I think all of that comes together fairly well. And then we've got, professionally as tools, we've got data sources. Some of my favorite ones are CoStar, which is a paid subscription service, but gives you a ton of access to data. Another one is policymap.com, which gives you an amazing breadth of census data on anything. And this is where I say, like, home values, average incomes, poverty rates, schools, like all sorts of things. Just that wealth of information for any given investment that you're looking at. When you're evaluating an investment, all those fundamentals tend to be covered by these tools. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's really cool. And I think that having such an open mind about it, in the way that you said, you're always able to get a fresh perspective from something is really interesting and eye-opening, because I think a lot of our goal is to have a lot of young people, a lot of new people who are new to this industry listening to this podcast. And if they're able to start to approach the way that they start to take anything in with that mindset, I think that that's going to unlock a ton of opportunity for people, and then you'll get even more books across your desk that way. Definitely, and so much wealth of information out there today. Yes. It's amazing, There's a new book on real estate coming out. It feels like every day, And there's a new podcast. There's a new blog or vlog or whatever, It's amazing the wealth of knowledge out there. Yeah, people are incredibly creative with how information can be used. In so many, to be beneficial for others in so many different ways. I think that it's really insane, and I always take for granted sometimes that we are really living in this age of information. But what is something for you too that recently, whether it's been a investment book or not, or anything that you've watched on TV, because we've had a decent amount of downtime this past year, or things we've been home. Is there anything that you've read, watched, looked at lately that you found interesting? If there's something specific that you can cite, is there anything brand new that you were able to pick up from that book or that TV show, that movie, whatever it was?
Yeah, man, wow.
Yeah.
There's a lot. Actually, one of my favorite books I reread this year was Private Equity Real Estate Investing. And that's a fantastic book for anybody who's looking at investing in real estate. It actually covers, the guy covers, he writes it under a pseudonym, called Sean Cook. But he's actually a real professional in the industry and has done very well for himself. That's one of my favorite books. I just love how crisply it's written. And I think I read it about a year ago, and then I reread it again this year.
Mm-hmm. I love that you used an example of something that you reread too, just based on the idea of that fresh perspective thing that we just talked about as well. I love that that's a great example. Were you able to kind of, from the first time you read it versus this time you read it, what was the experience like? How did it differ?
Yeah, it's I think a lot of times when we don't have an experience of something and we read about it, it's information. But then once you've experienced it personally, that scenario, it becomes a resonance of like wisdom, if you can call it that, So there were some things that resonated this time around at a deeper level, just because I've been through my role at Casoro Group. I've been at Casoro for and Upside Avenue for about 2 years now, and so some of those experiences that have come in the last year, especially during COVID, some of the challenges and restructuring of certain things and investing, hunting down deals and how you go about them. Some of those challenges are unique because this was a COVID period, right? Before that, it was rah, and then during COVID, it's like, oh, what's going to happen? And just that shift in perspective had changed the way I read the book.
Absolutely, yeah. That is such a good way of that's a great response, because it's so true. The first time you're taking something in, it is very informational, but then you experience it, then you lived it, and then you have that lived in experience and you relive it through this book. I think that's awesome. Thank you for sharing that. So as we wind down, a couple of personal questions, other questions we can ask you, Chi. You currently serve on the board for Chinmaya Mission Austin. This is a nonprofit organization that's dedicated to the service of humankind. In what ways have you found your involvement with this organization? How have you found it's been able to allow you to give back to your investment community and then to your larger community as a whole? What does this mission group do?
Yeah, definitely. So from an investment community, giving back to the investment community, I would say that's more spiritual in nature. It refreshes and recharges me, which allows me to do my job better and to operate with a philosophy of giving, as opposed to self-centering, which I'm definitely self-centered, no question about it, right?
I think all humans are a little bit,
Some period, right? No. I feel particularly vulnerable to that, but it does constantly remind me to step beyond myself and serve others, right? So that grounding then helps. You can take it everywhere, right? Yes. So that's the attempt to bring it into work and all of that. And then specifically for our community, we've got a nice little community here that it serves in Austin, and there, there's all sorts of opportunities to teach, like the value education classes. I've been sort of facilitating that for a number of years, and more recently, having joined the board, participating in, it's a hands-on board, so it's like participating in things like they need a new CRM system. Great. So, I'm hopping on calls with CRM providers and trying to find, for a nonprofit, which, what features do you have? How do things work? All that kind of stuff. Another thing is we're, looking at refinancing our loan. So then I'm reaching out to all the banks in the area, within a few miles of the center here in Austin, and reaching out to community banks and trying to organize, see what debt terms are and organize new potential new financing for the property, for the facility. So there's all these opportunities to serve in those capacities.
Awesome. That's incredible. I think
day to day.
Yeah, that is incredible. Kind of the way that you're able to take it and run with it in so many different directions and share that message, share that grounding that you said with other people, including your investment community. I love the philosophy behind Upside Avenue and the messages that you lead with, the core values that you lead with. And I think that if anybody listening wants to start their own business and can start thinking about their core values now, I think that's one of the biggest takeaways I feel like from this conversation. But to turn it back on you, the question that we ask everybody at the end of our podcast episodes is, what would you say are your keys to building wealth and unlocking financial freedom? So this is an individual answer that comes from you, Chi. It does not have to be financial. I'm very excited to hear your answer just based on our conversation we've had today. But what is something that has informed the way that you personally look at your unique definition of success?
Yeah, so to me, success is basically, are you happy at the end of the day when you rest your head down, on your pillow? Are you happy, right? And that means so many different things to so many people. one of the best definitions I've heard is like, if you think of your, and again, this goes back to our CEO, who's so smart, so wise. If you think of your life as a wheel, and you have all these different sort of like a pizza, right? And you can slice up a pizza into sort of slices. But if it's a wheel altogether, if there's any aspect of your life that is sort of flat, like that portion of the tire is flat, you can only go so fast in life, right? Because like, let's just say you're right. Like if your tire has six parts to it and one part is flat, it's going to go plunk, 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 right? And the faster you go, plunk, 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 right? And by the time you get to a highway speed, you'll blow the tire, right? Right. So we have to look at our entire lives as a whole, and there's every aspect, right? There's our relationships, there's our spiritual growth, there's the monetary side, there's our health, there's all these different aspects to our life, right? And so when you rest your head at night, how do you feel about all of it as a whole? That's really the question, right? So set your goals accordingly to get to the place where you want to be, right? And enjoy the journey along the way, and hustle.
Yeah. Wow, I love that. Not only did you make me hungry for pizza, but you made me definitely think about all of the different ways I can start to relook at my core values in business, my core values in life. Tonight when I go to bed, I want to have that thought in the back of my head. I want to wake up with that thought in the morning. So thank you so much for taking the time to share that message with me today. And I cannot wait to share it with everybody else.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Jess.
Thank you, Chi. So our listeners are probably going to have so much to take away from this episode. If anybody wants to get in touch with you, where's the best place people can reach you? Do you have any websites, social medias, email? What's the best way for anyone listening to this who would like to reach out to you to get in touch?
Definitely. Easiest way is to hop on upsideavenue.com, right? www.upsideavenue.com. Other ways of reaching out is you can call me on my cell, 540-220-8102, or text me if that's, a lot of people just like to text instead. Or you can email me. It's my first letter, C, full last name, Hathiramani on the podcast. So CHATHIRAMANI at Casoro Group, which is our parent company. Or you can find me on LinkedIn, and right at the top of my image, you'll see our phone number and my email. And so just LinkedIn. So easy ways to get in touch.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for, sharing everything today, for opening your heart to this conversation, and for making yourself so accessible to our listeners. Everybody take him up on that, and please be on the lookout for more upcoming CamaPlan events that will feature Chi Hathiramani and Upside Avenue. But until then, thank you everyone for joining us again this week on Road to Financial Freedom. And be sure to tune in next week to hear more from our experts who have paved their roads to financial freedom, or you can call CamaPlan today to learn more about how you can start to take control of your future wealth. Thank you again, Chi, and thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you all for tuning into our podcast. We truly hope that you're enjoying your ride along the road to financial freedom so far. If you like what you've heard and learned, or if you want to hear more about certain topics that we may have already covered or have yet to cover, please subscribe, rate, and leave us a review. We would love to hear any feedback from you so that we may continue to make our podcast the best that it can be for you, our listeners. Thanks again, everyone, and remember, tune in next week to The Road to Financial Freedom.